And good evening. Is it evening? Afternoon? Yes, it's good afternoon. Good afternoon to all of you out there in the interweb who have decided to join us on your fine Sunday afternoon. I'm so glad to have you here. And I am even more happy to have this awesome panel that we have gathered here. So who do we have with us today? We have with us Nalo Hopkinson. She is an award-winning Jamaican author that has lived in Jamaica, Guyana, the US, until she moved to Canada as a teenager. She is currently a professor of creative writing at the University of British Columbia, and she was the lead author of The House of Whispers, a serialized comic in the Neil Gaiman's Sandman universe. And those of us who have been busy here fangirling know that there is a lot more to her bio, but that is the bio she sent us. So that is the bio we are reading. And also with us is Alake Pilgrim. Alake's stories have been published by the Center for Fiction in New York, and she was included in the New Daughters of Africa anthology that's edited by Margaret Busby. And for those of you in Jamaica or who are planning to come to Calabash, you know that that collection is on for Calabash this year. So I'm definitely getting my hands on that, looking out for your story. Alake's first novel, Zoe and the Forest of Secrets, is a fantasy sci-fi adventure set in Trinidad. It is from award-winning publisher, UK publisher, Knights of, and she was shortlisted for the Bocas Lit Fest Children's Book Prize. If you have not yet read that book, you need to check it out. And what we are calling the up and comer on our list, the one to watch for sure. If you haven't yet got access to her work, start looking out for it, is Alexia Tolas. She explores the intricacies of small island life, drawing heavily from local folk tales and mythology. Her writing has been featured in literary journals like Granta, The Caribbean Writer, and she's been shortlisted for literary awards, including the Brooklyn Caribbean Literary Festival's Elizabeth Nunes Award. But Alexia, didn't you win that award? Why does it say shortlisted?
Oh, I guess I'm a little bit too humble. Yes, I did. I did win it. I did. I gotta go update that.
Because I had the pleasure and honor of adjudicating that award last year. And I was like, I'm pretty sure you won. And I have to say, guys, I read that story and I was like, I think the scientific term is bombat. That was the reaction I had to that story. So I really look forward to it. And you, am I mistaken? Are you shortlisted for the regional prize for Commonwealth this year? Do I have that right?
I shortlisted for the Commonwealth Prize. We won't find out the regional winner for another couple of weeks, but I'm just happy to have shortlisted. So yes.
Hey, that is awesome. So yes, as we said, we have a red hot panel for you all here today, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. This is a conversation that I wanted to have for a really long time, and I am super glad to have it now. So that is, I was about to say, you've heard enough from me. I have not introduced myself, and you all may not know me. My name is Tanya Batson-Savage. I am head cook, bottle washer at Banyan Books and or imprint Blouse Skirt Books. And I'm also an author on very good days. I have also, and a lover of fantasy fiction. I've written a children's collection, Pumpkin Belly and Other Stories, which is based on Jamaican folk tales and proverbs. So that brings you up to speed on everyone here. So let us dive into this conversation. And so without picking any author to respond, I'm going to throw this question here, and you can choose who answers first. If nobody starts, then I'll have to pick someone. So my first question is, do you see a distinguishing line between what is folklore and what is fantasy? Or do you see it just as do you just see an interplay between the two? Who wants to go first? Nobody? Nalo, it looks like you're unmuting.
I'll throw myself on that grenade. It's a question I have to consider a lot because I teach fantasy, folklore-based fantasy and folklore. And I think it's a long argument, but part of what I see it as is a continuum. So those stories got invented and told centuries ago sometimes, when there was no such thing as genre, or they weren't necessarily thought of as fiction, they were just stories. But they definitely inform the continuum where we now have fantasy, folklore-based fantasy and science fiction all draw very heavily on folklore. So I see it as talking back to our ancestors in a way.
Right, I definitely agree. Anyone else wants to jump in on that? I'd love to get each person's viewpoint. It's just I'm not choosing an order, so yeah.
No, I totally agree with Nalo. When I think about fantasy and folklore, I don't see a distinguishing line. Like you said, it's a continuum. We have stories that prove that our forebears not only were able to rationalize the unexplainable, but also they were incredibly imaginative. They were incredibly creative. We're an oral culture. We're an oral society. One of the things that we enjoy and that brings us together are these stories. And when we think about the connection between that fantastic element, that informs our culture. You know, so specifically in the Bahamas, we have a cryptoid called the Lusca, right? It was meant to rationalize the whirlpools, the vortexes and blue holes. And we're thinking, oh, it's a half shark, half octopus being. And well, it really was a squid. And the whirlpools weren't the Lusca yawning. It was actually, you know, the push and pull of the currents. But when you think about how deeply that's ingrained in our culture now, that has, you know, informed so much of our love for these blue holes and the protections around them. So yeah, that's how I see it. You know, fantasy is not exclusive from folklore, they're connected, right? So yeah.
Awesome. Alake, over to you.
Yeah, so initially I thought, I agree with everything that's been said so far, but initially when I thought of it, I thought of like how we used to distinguish between what's a dialect and what's a language. So someone, I think there's a famous thing, somebody would say, oh, a dialect is a language without an army, right? So I sometimes thought, okay, folklore is mythology without an army, because it's only certain civilizations that got associated, it seems, that shifted with mythology and with the gravitas, I guess, of that word. But then I thought more about it, and I moved away from that defensive space and thought, you know, folklore, one of the things I love about it is the idea that it's a collective creation over time, that, you know, it's not about, in a weird way, it's not solely about an individual. You know, it's like thinking about things like the steel pan or instruments that you can't pinpoint one person and say that was the inventor. It was communities and collective creation over time, and that's exciting. And it got me thinking differently even about my writing. You know, am I just an individual here writing, or am I really bringing other people, my ancestors, cultures, other people around me, other writers? Are we really in this thing kind of co-creating? Yeah.
I love that response, and I think it doesn't have to be, because the two responses are mutually exclusive. And I definitely think one of the things about writing is, you know, a work of art ends with the reader, the person who consumes it. And writers, I remember I said this, I got this from Kai Miller. He said, we're often told when we're growing up and learning to write what we know. But one of the things he's learned is that you write what you read. So whether you imbibed the story because it was told to you, or you read it as a writer, at least when you are just writing, and in different ways, it informs how your imagination builds. There is still that very communal space. You know, it mightn't feel communal if you were like me, is you one up in a plum tree reading a book, you know? But it mightn't feel communal, but there is a community of other minds that have fed into the story that you are reading, and then that you as a writer put out into the world in different ways. So I think those two ideas work very beautifully together. You know, it can be both things. So another question I have, and I know it's said about Trinidad, and I've heard Jamaicans say it about Jamaica, and I always find it hilarious that very independently we both say this. And I don't, Alexia, you tell us if they say it about Bahamas as well. But whenever a lot of things happen, we go, this is not a real place. And like Jamaicans say that about Jamaica all the time, because we're like this stuff cannot be made up. This place cannot be real. And I see it on Trinidad Twitter all the time, where Trinidadians say, this is not a real place. You know, when we live in a world that is so inherently paradoxical in a lot of the ways, you know, we are often, I know, especially in Jamaica, we are a place of dance hall and revelry, and we are also extremely Victorian in some of our ideas of manners, you know, and propriety. You know, we blend those things. There are ways in which, you know, even our forests, like our forests are not the forest we read about in folk tales from abroad. Is bush in Trinidad, bush in Jamaica is a whole different thing, right? So there is a mythical nature of the lands we live in. When we then go to write fantasy from these already mythical places, even just our unreal people and your histories, how does that inform what you write? How do you say then that you must absolutely be authentic, or are you willing to put aside authenticity? How does all of that work in your writing? I'm gonna flip it around this time, since Nalo had to go first. I'm gonna ask you to go first, Alake.
Oh man, I really want to hear Nalo's response to that, because I feel like that's one of the things I've loved about her work, right? Being able to clearly see that there's a deep love and respect for the cultures and the places that inform the work, and then the freedom to invent and imagine worlds upon worlds that I couldn't have imagined from that place. So, all right, so I'll try and give my little finny answer. You kind of reclaimed that phrase for me slightly, because it's a phrase that used to irritate. It still kind of irritates me or upsets me, offends me on behalf of all places. I'm like, how we can say it's not a real place? You're living in the place, how you can say it's not real? But you reclaimed it for me slightly today with that take on multiple realities, right? The mystical, magical, spiritual, whatever we want, you know, emotional, like so many realities, and then the clashing realities, which we can all acknowledge are so near the surface in Caribbean societies. So yeah, it gave me a different perspective on the phrase. My concern about the phrase initially was, I always feel like, wow, if we can't validate our realities, how can anyone else? You know what I mean? And I see it now, you know, because I have nieces, nephews, and now I have a child, and I see how I'm getting to sit next to him and watch how his imagination is being really informed by his life, but also really informed by television, which is almost 100% American and a very specific kind of American. And so I'm seeing how he's reshaping himself and trying to figure out, who am I in relation to Avengers? Who am I in relation to these kids and people who are having experiences and have a language and have just a way in the world that is so different from some of the ways I'm seeing around me. And it's a bit worrying, interesting. Okay, I'll stop there. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Alexia?
So I guess I have to say, this caused a whole debate in the Bahamas. I mean, heated discussions in the newspaper, online. Like there are some people who have like really, taken claim of the phrase. And then there are those who are like, no, we can't have that because it really does displace us from our own realities. But when I think about Caribbean fantasy, I think that Caribbean fantasy actually authenticates our space because it makes us real. One of the things that I think that when we think about this place is not a real place, it actually relates back to the paradise myth, because our space was always the background, the setting for somebody else's story, right? Our space was always the background of a Western protagonist, whether it be the colonizer or a tourist. And they come to our world, which is the fairy world, and they get to come, they get to have their adventures, they get to learn something about themselves, and then they leave. But we're the people that they're leaving behind. Our landscape, our culture, we're just tools by which this protagonist was able to exercise their own humanity. And so when I think about Caribbean fantasy, we are reclaiming that space. We're saying we're here. We're the protagonist now. And we don't write for that audience that was looking for an adventure or an escape away from their realities. We are exploring our realities. So that's what makes Caribbean fantasy very unique, because it's not an escape. It's taking what we already know and making it real. So yeah, I have a lot to say about this. I know, because that phrase.
You women are all so bright. I'm just like, yeah, I wish I could. It would look really weird if I was just sitting there taking all these notes. But I will rewatch. And just to say before I hear from you, Nalo, to remind those who are on that, we're going to have a Q&A at the end of the session, but you can feel free to start dropping your questions in the chat from now. We will be taking your questions. We're not meaning to leave you out. So please go ahead, drop those questions, those comments in the chat. All right. Yes.
Oh, I just want to say one more thing, because, and I know Nalo's going to be like, why me? But I remember being in my junior year, and we're in a West Indian lit class. And of course, we're reading all the famous exile writers. We're reading George Lamming, we're reading Jamaica Kincaid, and we have mad respect for these writers. But I remember one of my classmates saying, well, are we going to be like in the future? Like, are we going to be present in other spaces? Are we always going to be melancholic? And that really encouraged our professors to look outside of that genre that they had focused on for so long. That's how we were introduced to writers like Tobias Bukel and Nalo Hopkinson. And it really encouraged us, because we're like, oh, wait, we have the right to write about ourselves in these spaces. We have that right. So, and we just want to add to it now. So
great. Awesome. And I just want to say, because that is such a brilliant point, and I want to use that to, if you'd forgive me, Nalo, to make that a bit of a jump off point for your answer, if it is possible, because Brown Girl is Brown Girl in the Ring, right? Yes. I had to I'd read Midnight Robber first ages ago, and then I was supposed to do a paper, and I did. I was using Brown Girl in the Ring, and I had to reread it, and it was years after I had read the Derek Walcott play Tijon, and it was just amazing, because Tijon and his brothers always felt so steeped in folklore, like the three brothers, everything. It was perfectly built on that three brother structure of folklore. And you really reinterpreted that in this very new space with Brown Girl. And so I think that, how you make that kind of use of folklore, I think is a great jump off point, both in terms of the answer to the general question, as well as what Alexia just said, in terms of positioning ourselves in a future space, giving us the right to imagine ourselves differently and or in different worlds, So if you could, integrate that in your answer some way.
Okay. Loving what Alexia and Alake are saying. we absolutely have the right to imagine ourselves into any damn space we want. I mean, our ancestors did, talking about folklore. There's this beautiful story from the Taino people where the story was that they originally lived on the moon, and that they looked around and they recognized that all the shining things they could see in the sky were also spherical objects floating in the sky like the moon. And there's more to the story that I love. I tell it all the time, but that they imagine themselves up into space. So why not we? And as I said, I'm living a foreign. So the idea that this is not a real place is not something I'm hearing a lot, but I have maybe contradictory responses to it. And one is, of course, it's not a real space. It was, our regions were made spaces. People were taken from them. People were taken out of them. We are a hybridized, creolized space. And in that way, we are not real. On the other hand, you cannot write fiction that is stranger than fact. So we are absolutely real. We are absolutely, absolutely real. But when as a fiction writer, I try to reach for the glorious complexity of what is that Caribbean space, sometimes that's why I have recourse to fantasy, because it allows me to pull things together that I would be writing 17 history books to try to explain. So that is part of it. And the incorporating of the folklore and the fantasy, we tell these stories all the time. Tijan and his brothers is what helped me build the scaffolding, the brown girl in the ring. So, I mean, I'm looking back to one of an older piece, which also looks back to an older piece. The thing of taking the freedom to do it, not so much Brown Girl, but Midnight Robber, scared me to write, because I was still stuck in this space of, we have to be respectable. Even though I know different, there's nothing respectable about art. It does not have to be respectable, and sometimes is more fruitful when it isn't. But you're afraid what your auntie, mother, uncle, brother, son going to say, right? You're afraid to talk about you in church. So, so in order to free myself from that space, what I had to do was to say, all right, it's just me and the paper, or me and the screen now. Nobody's seen it. I can write what I want. That kind of imagination that, you know, anybody's child has very naturally, I can engage that space. Because now is not the time to worry about who's going to think and who's going to say. That'll happen later when I do the rewrite. But by then, if I'm looking at what I write and I like it, I got enough brashness that I'm probably going to leave it on the page the way it is, or try and make it even more so. I think as artists, we do ourselves and our audience a generosity when we take that courage. Not to say that we have to, not to say that you have to endanger yourself. You know, you were always first. But if this is something you want to communicate, best believe somebody else is feeling it. Best believe somebody else needs to read it too.
Awesome. I wanted to, I think that in Alake's response earlier, she mentioned her son and his exposure to television, and you know how that influences his sense of self. And one of the things I've often found is that with Caribbean literature, because there is always this concern of our identity being taken or eroded or replaced, there is often this weight on writers to write us into being, which is a thing you do when you write. But it often means that, you know, we don't think of writing romance so much. We don't think of writing fun literature that's just frivolous, just stories being stories, because they can. We often want to write weighted things. So we have put a lot of effort into literary fiction, you know. Do you feel that weight of responsibility when you are writing in fantasy, building on folklore? Do you feel that weight to say, I must ensure that the children know themselves? Or do you just give yourself the freedom to write? How do you, what is your process? Or do you find a balance? All right, let me pick. Alexia, you go first.
Like, I'm formulating in my head, because that's definitely something that I've heard, as a young writer. I have been approached by many people in my field because I am a teacher as well. And the idea is that, oh, you write, therefore you must be writing the next CXC novel, or you must be writing the next BGCSE novel, or a short story collection that's going to be geared towards, teaching the children. And I shy away from that because I don't want to limit myself to that. If someone happens to find a lesson, if someone happens to find enjoyment, entertainment, if you think that this story is going to work, then great. But I tell many of my comrades in the department, about the Ministry of Education, you're not going to ever have my stories on your curriculum, because that's against everything that you find moral. But like, Tanya. So, but I think it's in addition to this idea of living up to this legacy, living up to the image that we want to present about our nations, about this space. I think it's also the idea of who are we going to sell to, right? And I think that if we're in a specific time right now where Caribbean literature is booming. We have people like Anya Lloyd Banwu with When We Were Birds. We have Kevin, I don't want to butcher his name, but Kevin with Hungry Ghost. We have a space now where we don't have to limit ourselves, right? And I think that by limiting ourselves just to the literary fiction genre, we don't have these spaces that our people actually want to read. I'm going to tell you, people in my community are probably not going to read a literary fiction, but they will read fantasy. They will read science fiction. They will read a murder mystery. They will definitely read a romance. And we have these stories, so we can explore that. I will sound like probably very hypocritical to one of my best friends, because she told me when I was thinking about what am I going to do now? I've written some short stories. Now it's time for a novel. I felt the pressure to write, the literary masterpiece for this place. And she said, is that what you want to write? Is that the story you want to tell? Is it for you, or are you trying to please somebody? Because it's never going to be authentic if you're just trying to please somebody. If they like it, then they will accept it. So yeah, that's my take on it.
All right, awesome. And just shameless plug for Blue Banyan / Blouse Skirt Books. We did publish Kevin Jarrett Hussein's Beast of Kikuyu before Hungry Ghost. I'm very much looking forward to Hungry Ghost, but I'm just saying. And I thought, Alake, I'd love to hear from you, because you write children's fiction. So I imagine if the pressure is anywhere, it's going to be there. And I wonder how how you negotiate that weight, if you feel that weight at all, seeing as how your publisher is in the UK,
Yeah, it's definitely levels of negotiation, translation of oneself and the ideas. And listening to Nalo and Alexia speak is making me realize just how much I'm still on a journey of trying to find more freedom in my writing. It's really, really an ongoing journey, because I don't ever feel, oh, I just sit and, no, I mean, it's not like that at all. Definitely always thinking about culture, community, history, audience, as I said, layers and layers of negotiation and translation. And while I'm not saying that's a bad thing, it's freedom or the process of asking yourself, what is it to be free, is a big part of being alive. So I think that I'm still on that journey. How I came to writing the children's book is also interesting, related to what Alexia said. I'd been writing short stories for years and really was trying to write a novel for adults, very literary and very melancholy, all of the things. And it just was not, it's like pulling teeth. There just it still hasn't come together. And it's probably there somewhere because we don't even have to limit ourselves to genres, right? We can write all kinds of things in our lifetime. But this other piece just was bringing me joy. And I would keep coming back to it. And I'd even recognize it to be a children's book at the time. I was just writing a story that was bringing me joy and interest and excitement. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but I think the push and pull is kind of like sea waves, right? That feeling of being in the sea. I'm not set at it. I don't feel imprisoned by history or by my responsibility to people and places that matter to me, but peoples and places. But at the same time, I'm inspired today to keep digging into what is it to be free as a writer and as a person. Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Another question I have is, diversity and inclusion are the buzzwords in the literary space right now. And I always find it's weird as a Caribbean person, diversity is just who we are. It's like, it's just, yeah. It's Tuesday, man. But there are ways in which I always find that it's interesting how you use a word and then a word gets co-opted in a particular space, and so it has a very specific meaning. And so diverse doesn't just mean different anymore. It has very specific meanings about inclusion of particular communities, and you are all aware of that. Do you think that the push for diversity is a good or bad thing for Caribbean fiction, and or how? Nalo, would you like to start that off for me?
There's some lecture questions you have, man. And again, remember, I'm living a foreign, so that word gets used is becoming actually less and less, having less and less currency because of that very problem, that it says difference. And I've started instead saying all the rest of us, because when you go back to what diverse without the E really means, it means many, 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 many kinds of things. I think it is definitely a good thing to have how could it not be, to have the push towards making sure you include as many stories and as many representations of people as possible, because that means more stories. That is never a bad thing. How we do it, you need to always be thinking about. The way Alake says that you're always doing this negotiation, you're in this ocean, and it's not, for me, a resentment either. But when you talk about diversity for who, one of the universities I taught at was the department was trying to put together its call for people who wanted to be in the MFA, and one of the questions they wanted to put on there was like, what will you bring to the sort of philosophy of diversity of the university? And I had to say, who are we asking this question to? Because certain of our students step on the campus and you're asking them to go and do, and they bring the diversity, you're asking them to go and do more over and above just trying to survive in this space. So you're right that words get co-opted. So we have to keep coming up with new words. We have to keep coming up with another temporary autonomous zone. Like you think that one, you move on and come up with a new word, somebody is going to take it and make a hash of it. But the principle of trying to get as many stories onto the into the accessibility to everybody is, I think, a glorious one, and makes it possible for somebody like all of us to write. So yeah, I'm good with it. Just we have to keep changing the names, so we keep changing our understanding of what it is we're thinking about.
All right, Alexia, how about you? Do you have thoughts on that?
I do. I think I speak for myself, because when I think about like Trinidad and Jamaica, where you have millions of people, and we have our 400,000 in this entire country over here in the Bahamas, the space is so small that you are in close proximity to people from all different walks of life, of all different experiences, and to ignore those people is really like you're going to church and just turning the other way, right? You can't do that. So I think that when it comes to Caribbean literature, and I've been thinking this for quite a long time, that we tend to have a wide representation already because our spaces are small and intimate, because we have that strong sense of community. So I think for us, when we think about diversity, it kind of already came with the space, you know. And we want to make sure that we already are a small space. We want to make sure that everyone that we speak about and that we put into our stories, they feel represented. You know, that expands not only, us as a people, but it just expands out to the world. And I think that we're in a unique place where we can do that because, again, our communities are so tightly knit.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Great. Awesome. Awesome response. Alake, how about you?
Yeah, no, just to jump in on some things that people have already raised. It's like one of the things I've been reflecting on is books and these stories moving across different spaces, right? So diversity, it's so seeking, for instance, if I'm seeking an American audience in addition to the audience I have in the Caribbean, what diversity means to which American audience, all of that shifts. And then we have gatekeepers, right? It's not just us writing our stories and sharing it, even though thankfully with social media and the web, I can actually do that too, which is great. But then if I'm going a certain route, there are so many gatekeepers. And those gatekeepers, and I'd love to hear people speak to this, not in a negative way, but just in the way of really reflecting some of the complexities of this, because to some of those gatekeepers, I'm in their mind synonymous with African American. Now I am, and I'm also, and that may apply to somebody now who's reading to them as white or who's reading to them as whatever is the category from the space they're operating from. And so I've been thinking a lot lately about that process of like trying to fit yourself like a duan into all different kinds of shapes. And to keep my sanity now, I keep bringing myself back to, I have to keep asking myself, who am I writing for? Who am I writing for? And it may not be a limited group that I'm writing for, but at least let me start with someone in my mind that I'm writing for that frees me to write, rather than I'm writing for, I'm starting from a place of contorting myself constantly. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. And Nalo, yeah, go ahead. You look like you want to respond. Yes?
I do, because 2 days ago, I had an experience I have never had before as a writer, and it was the most beautiful thing. I have a short story coming out, an anthology, cannot tell you which just yet, news is still embargoed, but I got the style sheet. And the stories are clearly from people from all over the world. It was a 45-page style sheet that made, that laid out different usages of different words and different coinages that might come from the different writers, telling the copy editor it is okay to leave these as is. And that was a thing of beauty, because one of the pressures you get is house style, where I would be spelling something the Jamaican way or the Trinidadian way and have the copy editor take the U out of color. And I'm like, no, this person is from Trinidad. To them, color has a U. I had to make the argument all the time. This is the first time I have never had to make the argument. So I think the publishers, some of them are learning, and the more we can keep pushing, and the more that the audiences keep pushing, because God bless the readers and social media, because they will tell you and they will tell the publishers what they think. So that was just a moment of revelation for me. I had to go back and thank the copy editor for doing that, because I hope there is going to be more of it. I hope that idea is going to spread.
That sounds great, and you are so right. And I speak as a person who, because I self-published my first my children's book collection, so I circumvented the gatekeepers, and then I established my own publishing company, and so became a gatekeeper. And so I speak from both positions, and I know it can be such a negotiation and an interesting one. Even as myself as a Jamaican, that I think I'm reasonably au fait with Caribbean culture, and then I get something from a Trinidadian, and I have to go, exactly what is that? Or somebody from Guyana, and because one of the fantasy writers that we've published is Imam Bashk, and so his books have taught me a lot about Guyanese culture and the ways in which culture is mismatching. I remember, and I have to give this example because I absolutely love it. He'd written the scene with an Obia woman. He said she had frizzy hair, He'd given a description. In my head, she was black, and I knew she was an Obia woman because of the flags, the colored flags that were outside of her house. So the minute he described that, I was like, yeah, Obia woman. Goes in, but she turns out to be, she's a hustler. She's not a real Obia woman, And so I said to him, I find it a little problematic. Like the one black character you have in here, turns out to be this little hustler, she's not even a real Obia woman. He's like, she's not black. I'm like, what do you mean she's not black? She's an Obia woman. He's like, no. She's Indian. I'm like, and he's like, it's a thing in Guyana. You have a lot of these Indian women who are practicing Obia. I'm like, what? And it's also how I saw, like, I didn't know that, like, the way we have acculturated the use of I don't know how to pronounce it properly. I've only read the word. I think it's Jandi flags.
Jandi, yeah.
Say it again.
Yeah, Jandi, Hindu flags, right. Prayer flags.
Exactly. So in my context as a Jamaican, I never associated that with Hindu culture. I mean, even when I traveled to outside of the Caribbean and I saw it elsewhere, I thought of it as something else. It was when he said it, I realized, oh, okay. So syncretism is an awesome thing when you're in a space where so many diverse cultures come together, because there is such a small Hindu presence in Jamaica that a lot of it got syncretized in an Afro-Jamaican culture without many Afro-Jamaicans actually knowing, that it had anything outside it of Africa to do with that. And so it really is amazing, these ways in which then somebody else says, no, that doesn't mean that, or you can't spell, you have to spell Shadow Benny as Shadon Bene. I mean, which would mean your average Trini would know what is Shadow Benny because they are not associating it with the French, so that the ways in which gatekeepers can innocently or not, affect what ends up on the page and gets translated really is an amazing thing. And now I want to get to what I hope is an even more fun part. Not to say this conversation has not been really thrilling and interesting. Since we're dealing with Caribbean fantasy, folklore, all of that, do any of you have any particular creatures that you have not yet written about? And the creature can be a humanoid, so I just mean a fantastical creature you have not yet written about that you would love to write about. Or if you don't have such a one, if you just have a favorite one, and tell us about what you love about that character, anybody wants to jump it off, or do I have to pick? Alexia, you look like you're bursting, man.
I've already mentioned it already. It's the Lusco. I love it, because I remember as a child, we have I think it's either the second or the third deepest blue hole in the world on the island that I'm from. It's Dean's Blue Hole in Long Island. And I remember standing up over the ridge, and you have to jump in. Like, that's a test of your mettle, right? Can you jump in? And I'm looking down and I see like this shape, and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's a Lusco. Oh my gosh, it's there. I'm not jumping in there. We're gonna die. But my cousin was like, no, you gotta jump in. You gotta jump in now. And ever since, I always wanted to capture that feeling, that like for a moment, we honestly thought we were seeing something, like we were seeing this creature come to life. We were like, we're living the fantasy, right? I really want to write about the Lusco. I want to talk about this idea of, using the Lusco somehow in some way to talk about the shared memory, because in that blue hole, we also found some of the only artifacts that we have of our indigenous people, the Lucayans. If you're familiar with the Bahamas, we're very flat. And for a long time, historians and archaeologists even wondered if we had an indigenous population. It wasn't until they went looking in some of the deepest caves and in the blue holes that they found those artifacts. So for a time, we did not have a history that extended beyond the first colonists, right? So I wanted to use that somehow to connect to memory, to connect to that long shared past. And, you know, we've been looking into like using Taino language, having to borrow perhaps from our cousins in Puerto Rico and in Cuba. But, you know, it's just exciting. You know, that's why I'm over here bursting, because I'm still trying to figure out how can that work? How can that work? And then there's a couple of others, like, for instance, we have Pretty Molly's. You know, Pretty Molly's, that's something else I want to explore. For some people in parts of the country, it's a mermaid. For others, it's a ghost. I want to explore that as well, because it's also connected to our history of slavery. So there's all kinds of different cryptoids and creatures and folklore that we want to touch on. And I think it's really important because we're starting to lose that, right? You know, I talk to some of my students and I bring up some of these folk tales and they're like, what's that? I brought up the Obeah woman. They're like, I don't know what that is. And it was, I know, look, and I felt like I have failed you. This is me. This is my failure. So we started introducing the books, and there's so few. And that's why we want to encourage. That's why when I saw Aleke's book, I was like, this is beautiful, right? I have to use this. Or for instance, Shakira Bourne with Josephine Against the Sea. And now she has, oh no, I keep saying Zombie Island, but it's not Zombie Island.
Somebody in Nightmare Island.
Yes.
Nightmare.
So I don't know why I keep saying Zombie Island, but yes, Nightmare Island. And I'm reading it right now. And I'm like, I wish I had these stories when I was in middle school. I wish I had these stories when I was a child, but luckily I can give those to my cousins. I can give those to my kids.
Yes.
So yes.
Yeah, I know. So we published Josephine Against the Sea as My Fishy Stepmom. Yes. And I remember I was reading the manuscript on a flight, and I was just like, this is the story we need. You know, Caribbean kids need these stories. It's not about well-behaved children or children who learn the lessons of not, you know, listening to your parents and whatever. She is an own way little girl who my mother would have sought out properly. You know? And I loved it because, you know, she's not out of order, but she's outspoken. And I think we need characters that our kids can see and see themselves in. And it's funny, and I'm gonna let everybody else speak. My niece, who's now 16, I said she said she's gonna start a book talk channel with her friends, and she was naming all the books she's doing, and she's like, I'm like, sweetie, all these books are foreign. Do you not read Caribbean books? And she's like, but auntie, all of the Caribbean books are set long time ago. And I was like, my book? She's like, well, all of the ones except yours. Only the ones you give me are from now. And I'm like, it is. So we do have a challenge of distance. We do have and it's not just this generation, it's been building for a while, that for varying reasons don't have access to the culture and don't have access to books that allow them to see themselves as present beings living in the now. Not and it's great to learn about what happened in the 1950s. I'm a huge fan, you know, of our classics, but we require more, you know. It can't all be vegetables. Ice cream is a thing, right? You know. And so, having jumped in there, Alake, what's your take on this? Yes.
Yeah, no, I have a character right now in Zoo, and she. Sometimes I have to pull myself because I don't even know that her story can fit in can be accepted in a children's book framework. Because really, to me, she is a Sukuyan Lago who made one in part by centuries ago by an enslaver.
I'm sorry, she's a what?
Sukuyan. You know Sukuyan?
Okay.
Yes, Sukuyan. Sukuyan. For those, who don't know the blood sucking, it's typical. Yeah, well, hi, exactly. and Lagahu, the shapeshifter hunter that's typically seen as male. Interestingly, Supriya is typically seen as older female, Lagahu as male. But to me, she's a blend of the two, and her history goes back to enslavement, because I always love, we have a story here in Trinidad of Lopino. We have an area, and the Count Lopino, they call him Count. He was an enslaver, and he is one of our early vampire stories. But it's not a vampire story that's a typical European vampire story, or the ones I've been exposed to so far, the traditional ones. He's a Caribbean vampire. You know, that's how he is known in like about town. The man is still spoken of. And so that kind of link, sorry, just to jump back to something we said really at the beginning, the idea that history and the future aren't really opposites, but that Nalo gave that amazing story of them on the moon. And so yes, the idea that there's future in the history, there's history in the future, it's connected, excites me. So I think this character might reveal some of that. Yeah.
Love that. Love that. Nalo, how about you?
I am always a little loath to talk about something that I haven't written yet, but that is in my head. But I do have a confession to make to Alexia, and that is that the story that I'm currently working on, part of it was inspired by the Luska. Now, my Luska is not going to be your Luska. I can already tell from the way we're talking about it that yours is going to be a different glorious thing. But I remember at first thinking, this is from the Bahamas, Nalo. You set the story in Jamaica. How can you do that? I said, well, we got blowholes too. It's the same broadly geographic region. Why would the Luska exist only there? So I was very inspired by the sort of squid-like nature and the blue holes and the way that Jamaica is basically built on limestone. So we have a lot of these vertical caves. I am at the stage where I am continually searching out new characters, new creatures from folklore, because we have so many and they are getting lost. And one of the things I do in my teaching, when I'm doing the right courses, I will get my students to go and research creatures from their own folklores and their own cultures and come back and write stories using those creatures. And I forbid certain ones. I don't want to hear, there's certain ones that you get all the time. And I thought, no, not those, not the Cinderella ones, not the Disney ones. Go and find ones you have never heard of and bring them and share them with us. And we get some wonderful stories. And so I think that starts to help to bring this stuff into the present.
That's awesome. And I have to say, I love, I think the one of the greatest benefits to me being a Caribbean publisher has been how reading these different stories has opened my eyes about the similarities and the differences. I mean, it's something that I already knew, having read Caribbean lit, but especially for fantasy fiction, it's allowed me to see it at a more like a more visceral level. Like, I know we all went through, enslavement and colonization and all that. You get all of that. My brain always automatically plays I think it's from the Dragon Can Dance. All we is one. That is whenever I think of Caribbean unity, that's what my brain plays. Apologies for the terrible Trini accent.
Now you got the upswing at the end, so everything sounds like a question.
So, I mean, and it's just really been amazing the ways in which different creatures, or sometimes versions of the same creatures, exist throughout the islands and replicate, and I think it is an awesome thing. And I really look forward to seeing these stories. And I also have to confess that a story I've been writing for the longest time, one of the characters I considered is the Lugahu, to borrow him. I was like, he's not here, but I don't care. Always one. I'm gonna borrow. And I think that is amazing. And I want to make sure that I throw some questions out just to say, B Kwame, I really hope I've been saying her name right. First off, Alake, she says your question about what does it mean to be free. It's like a great question. And I totally echo that as a writer, as a person. It is an awesome question to have to ask yourself. How do you do that? How do you contend with all of these issues and still be free? But then her question comes, and I thought to all of you, what advice do you all have with regard to validating Caribbean culture, including fantasy, when the gatekeepers don't get it? And she's contextualized that she's a Canadian-born writer of Jamaican parentage, and so she has to navigate that negotiation of translation. So she has that question. How do you deal with it? Since you have the most experience, Nalo, I'm gonna start off with you, because you've negotiated with publishers. If your publisher, your editor doesn't get the point you're trying to make, you're being something that is true and authentic to the character, the space that you are writing, built on Caribbean culture, but your editor doesn't get it, how do you push back? How do you negotiate to get that in the fiction? She is asking.
Yes, and yeah, being Jamaican Canadian with experience from Trinidad and Guyana as well, and publishing largely in the US context. If you already have an editor, that means you already have somebody with a vested interest in publishing you. So the first thing I would do would be to talk back to them, like in a, adult to adult, explain what the context is. Sometimes that is all it takes. They might have other suggestions for trying to help you communicate it to a wider audience, but you can always say, no, leave it. This is the way I want it. Other option is to find another publisher, look for a Blue Banyan, that kind of thing. And always be ready to walk. That is very, very hard. But if you come from that strength of being prepared to say, sorry, no, not you, and pulling your work and going and looking elsewhere, then you don't have a whole lot left to lose. But first try talking to them. And what a lot of new writers don't always know is the difference between editing and copy editing when it gets to the copy editing stage. And if the copy editor says, usually this is spelled with a U, they are asking a question. They are not telling you this is how it should be. You are the authority and you get to say, no, this is how I want it. So it's a bunch of little tricks you have to have in your trick bag to try. And if none of those work, be ready to walk.
All right. Alake, do you have something to add?
Yes, I think thankfully now there's almost like a catalog of books that you can pull on to show that it exists. Because I think sometimes people are afraid they in their mind, you're the first. You may be the first they've come across this from, but you ain't. And we are not, thankfully. We have our Nalos, we have so many others now. So just pull their books and show them, and they'll be like, oh, not only has this person, but many, many awards and many, so they can calm down and be like, okay, it's not going to alienate readers. There is a readership for this and way more, Mm.
Awesome. So sorry,
both on your people, both on your people. Both on your people. It will be helpful.
Indeed. Alexia, did I see your finger indicating?
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
Well, I'm just starting my journey into publishing long form, but I can tell you what some of my friends have told me. So Sharma Taylor, Shakira Bourne, they told me you have to know what you're willing to negotiate with. So for instance, I have a large cast in my work in progress. And I know that for some people, that's a big no-no. But my lived experience, you don't mention the name of the guy next door. You've known him all your life. You don't mention the name of this person. These people have vested interest in your characters. When you think about a character, they're going to know this Grammy, this grandpa, this uncle. And so when we're dealing with, these traditions, we have to know what we want to negotiate with. Are you willing to negotiate these characters out of your novel? Are you willing to negotiate this trope, this element? And then you need to find someone who is willing to work with you, or someone who can convince you that perhaps maybe you need to be reined in, right? So you need to know when you need to be reined in, and then when something is working against your aim. So I'm just passing on what was passed down to me.
Awesome. So it is that time of I can't believe an hour has passed already. They do say time flies when you're having fun, right? I've just checked. We don't have any more questions in the chat. So for those of you who joined us, thank you very much for listening. And to you, absolutely awesome group of writers, Alake, Nalo, Alexia, thank you very much for sharing your time with us. Thank you very much for sharing your brain with us. It was a beautiful thing to partake in. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you so much. Those of you who are listening, please, this is YouTube, so I've got to say it. Please like and subscribe to our channel. This is the start of something. We're trying to do more of these conversations. We think we have great writers in the Caribbean, published by us and published elsewhere, that we want to have more conversations with. And they apparently are often beautiful people who, when I say, hey, would you like to be on this panel? They say yes. So we very much intend to take advantage of their willingness to talk to us and have these conversations. So subscribe so you can be notified when we're having our next one. Thank you all so much, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, everybody. It's awesome.